Hi, everybody. I'm John Kraska, Executive Director for Every Library and the Every Library Institute. I'm joined by my colleague and friend Tim Chiaravini today. We're talking about HR 7525, which is the Special District Grant Accessibility Act. This conversation is intended to help inform stakeholders who work within the special districts, the public library special district space, either as state libraries. As state library associations or themselves, stakeholders at libraries. We're not looking to lobby you about the project or about the legislation. We're not looking to do a call to action today. That there is one involved if you believe strongly in this as an issue. But we really want to be able to talk through what the implications are for this bill, how the library community should be, what we think should be engaged with it, but also how do we take a look at implementation, rules making, and after the fact, if it passes, utilization. So, Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us through the top level stuff. I'll come back after you take us through. We're going to just very briefly, though, before I give it to you, Tim, I apologize. Um, Every Library Institute, as distinct from every library is our 501(c)(4) political action committee side. This is not a political action committee conversation today. This is our public policy, tax policy, education policy think tank side. Every Library Institute is a 501(c)(3). It's nonprofit. We do a number of different activities to support the sector, issue analysis like this, policy development, like what do we do next? Model legislation. We've got a couple things floating around, particularly around the right to read right now. We research topics as esoteric as how do you utilize recreational cannabis revenue to fund public libraries, stuff like that. And then the opinion polling that we do, training, coaching, and guidance. And then this project itself is really based in our coalitions and alliances work. So, Tim, what are we going to talk about today?
Yes, sure. So basically we wanted to, first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming. And I know I had some we had some communication with many of you or folks who've worked in your offices. And I think in those conversations you helped us both identify some questions about this legislation, also clarify a few things for us. So we're really glad that you made some time in your schedule to be with us today. We're going to do just a brief introduction, talking a little bit about every library's participation in the National Special Districts Coalition, then talking about a little bit what we've learned from them about this legislation and some statistics. And then we're really going to go into the core here, which is, what's the issue, the problem that's trying to be solved, and what is the solution? And then what does that mean specifically for libraries? We will have a Q&A, and we'll just end with, I have a little postscript about another activity that the National Special Districts Coalition is involved in that some of you or some of your colleagues may want to be involved with as well. So the National Special Districts Coalition, many of you know me from my work with COSLA, and since stepping away from COSLA, I've been pursuing with partners, working with John and every library, something that I've always long been interested in, which is, what are the tables that libraries are not necessarily naturally at that we could be at or should be at, particularly those that might involve some funding implications for us. So as John and I were kind of looking at that coalition and alliance landscape, National Special Districts Coalition popped up for us right away. Do you want to go to the next slide, John? You can see here basically their tagline, their little mission statement, kind of elevator statement about what the National Special Districts Coalition is. And, the color-coded states we've come to learn that not special districts are not as numerous or common or active in all states equally, of course. And the states that are listed here are really the core of the NSDC work. Now, they are very much interested in expanding that membership and expanding their work. And that's something that we talk about with them a little bit too, because there are maybe some states that do have a number of special district libraries that aren't really at this table with them. Now, NSDC itself is, of course, not library focused, but as one of the types of organizations that are served by special districts, thanks, John, they are definitely interested in the library voice, and that's something that every library institute has been working with them to bring to the table on. So let's take a look at the next slide, John. What this slide has on here is some of the kind of basic information that, frankly, we started our conversation with NSDC around. From they look at part of their talking points are that there are 35,000 special districts libraries across all of the states, or I'm sorry, special districts of all types across the states. Now, as I've discussed with a number of you, we've relied so far on their statistics about numbers of special district libraries, and they're showing about 1,660 across 28 states. I think in some states that seems what we have stat-wise for some states seems to be pretty spot on. For others, there are some questions about, well, exactly what was the definition of a special district library in this case. But in any case, there's a significant number of libraries that fall under what NSDC is doing, and by extension, could be impacted by any legislation that they're supporting. I think that, in terms of what their definition of special district is, there are, some things on this slide. Obviously, they're established to collect revenue, make expenditures, issue debt. They are a legal entity that could be sued. And you can see some of the other things on here that they basically put forward as kind of this is the community that we're going forward with. And very importantly, the last bullet point is they do not include school districts in their work. School districts are, they who may be special districts also, but they are a separate thing aside from the types of special districts that NSDC typically works with. Um, we're kind of now getting into what's the problem, what's the issue here that NSDC is looking to solve with this piece of legislation that caught our eye, 7525. And it really revolves around the definition at the federal level of special district, and more specifically, a consistent definition that can be referenced and will be part of legislation without necessarily having to go out of your way to say those words special district and define it in each and every piece of legislation. I'm going to go ahead, John, to the next slide. So yeah, this goes into the problem a little bit more. There isn't at the federal level a consistent definition or even an understanding necessarily of what constitutes a special district of any type. Federal government does not consider districts geographic units of government. That's an issue. The statistical collection efforts are not what they could be in terms of accurately being able to reflect numbers on this. So federal programs that are generally geared toward general government services are actually intended to go to entities like special districts. But if they're not defined clearly, or if there can be a case made, or there could be hesitation as to whether a special district entity actually is eligible for any particular pot of funding. So this results in some difficulty and lack of clarity, and in some cases probably non-movement. Now, we do want to note, and we know this, that we're not talking about federal funding that comes through IMLS. That has some different definitions around, and a lot of that flows to the states, and the states have the opportunity to avoid some of this issue. But where this does come in is in other types of legislation that libraries may have an interest in, may want to go for. If this special district lack of definition issue exists in that legislation, they could be stopped from that. And we do have the examples that I've gotten in talking with a number of you are there are pots of money out there that might be, say, for disaster recovery or for infrastructure. Those are two really good examples that came up again and again. The way that the legislation is written, it's not clear whether a special district of any type could avail themselves of this funding, which creates issues obviously then for special district libraries. So it's that's the problem. It's not with all federal funding, it's with some federal funding, but enough federal funding, and there are enough special district libraries that we feel, yes, this is something that the library voice should be at the table for to advocate, get this taken care of so that we can have some more opportunities in front of us. This slide actually shows the definition. This is the solution. This is what's basically in the legislation. The definition that you see at the top of the slide, I'm not going to read it, but that's the actual language of the bill that basically the bill says we want this to be considered the definition of special district and legislation that includes reference when you're writing legislation, it will be written in a way that includes this, and everybody will know what we're talking about and the eligibility is there. And there are some, key terms in there that are very important from the legal and the legislative standpoint about boundaries and the specificity of the services provided and that special districts are indeed political subdivisions. This I kind of feel funny walking into NSDC over this last year on this because they've been working on this for a long time. NSDC has been doing really focused on this for about 3 years. They've been bringing coalitions of states together. They've been bringing their advocacy efforts to the Hill very frequently for this. So we're coming in at a really good time and adding another voice that they are very welcome to have. But it's definitely an effort that has been ongoing for a number of years. And I think everyone may be aware from the information we set out ahead of time that the HR 7525 has passed the House and by a really comfortable margin as well. So you can see it had 22 co-sponsors, both Republicans and Democrats, passed earlier this month and is now in the hands of the Senate. We, of course, don't know the timing in the Senate. They also have not identified specific champions, at least as of late last week, within the Senate. So that is an issue, and that's a topic that we're continuing to track with NSDC as well. Every library has put information out about this, where there's the policy guidance link. There have been a couple of blog posts and then the call to action. John, did you want to say anything else about the Every Library information on this?
Well, the guidance is intended to, it's part and parcel for this kind of work, but the call to action is a traditional every library. Hey, contact Congress. Again, I'm not trying to encourage many of you in your official roles to do that, but I do want to share that we do have a political perspective on this as well as a policy perspective. So,
Yeah,
all right, can I grab it now, Tim?
absolutely.
Thank you. So let's talk specifically about the the public library framework that, as Tim said, that we've been moving into this National Special Districts Coalition framework, and with a particular eye towards 7525. The fact that it's passed the House already is pretty amazing, given a divided Congress and a Congress that doesn't do much these days. The opportunities in the Senate, either this session or next session, though, are pretty clear. There are tens of thousands of special districts around the country, including public libraries, who will stand to benefit from this. It makes sense why it's moving. It has rare bipartisan kinds of support. The definitions that are leading to that count that Tim referenced earlier, where there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 states that have a definition for special districts, are coming from us. It's not coming from the National Special Districts Coalition. It's coming from us in a particular place. And there is a little bit of data verification that needs to get done as we move from this legislative conversation into rules making and implementation. I'm not trying to blame us as a sector for this. Some of the definitional issues with an IMLS, I mean, I've never been part of more interesting working groups than groups like Measures That Matter, trying to figure out what the heck's going on with, outcomes and such. The data veracity within the IMLS framework is now being looked at it will be looked at by the Census Bureau, by other federal agencies as they have to implement legislation that will eventually have authorization for special districts. So I want to surface this with us here. City and county, municipal government, which is cities, towns, and villages, county and parish. We jump down to Native American tribal government, nonprofit association, other. Those are not included anywhere in the definitions by design, especially nonprofit association or agency. Those are 501(c)(3)s. They're eligible for grant programs in a different way. The library district definition within IMLS, within the PLS, says very similar things to what the HR 7525 also says, but it's public libraries defined by the FSCS. And the FSCS, I'll get to on the next slide, is where any sort of head scratching on this bill, any sort of head scratching on the NSDC counts, I think has been introduced. Also, the multi-jurisdictional libraries that are out there, and this, and I do want to mention school district libraries as distinct from school districts in certain jurisdictions because we have a very complicated internal environment, and the Census Bureau definition that will happen if 7525 passes is very simple. So we're going to need to be prepared to engage the rules making process, engage with congressional committees, and engage with federal agencies to make sure that eligible entities who wish to apply are considered to be properly eligible. The vast majority will be, but we've got some situations here with the federal state cooperative system, the FSCS, where over time, I don't know all the backstory. I'm not trying to blame Rehoboth Beach right now, but I know Rehoboth Beach pretty well because we've got a big, long, wonderful relationship with the Delaware Division of Libraries. Okay. This includes me visiting that place. And I looked up their definition for Delaware because in the conversations that we've been having with stakeholders, Tim has mentioned that some people have said, I don't know, why we have any special districts. I don't know, Illinois littered with them, Colorado littered with them. Delaware, in my lived experience professionally, there shouldn't be any either, except that the federated data source that we all use says that it is a library district. So the good people over at the National Special Districts Coalition looked at the data that was available, put us into there, and we're trying to now work through that as a coalition member, and again, into that rules making process if this passes. Because Rehoboth Beach Public Library, it says in the data about them that it's a library district, but they are a 501c3 nonprofit independent library dedicated to serving Rehoboth Beach. You can cut them a check right now and get a tax deduction. And I'm bringing this up not to shame, not to blame, but if this does pass, folks, we're going to have to tighten up our data and participate in this definitions process. Otherwise, eligible entities and uneligible entities will cause confusion amongst Congress and federal agencies, and that never goes good. The other reason that we're involved in this coalition, and the reason that we want to lean in on HR 7525 so strongly, is that we have missed funding opportunities in the past for special district libraries. When we talk about CARES Act and ARPA, and the funding that came through from Congress through IMLS with the LSTA framework, what Congress did with ARPA money and CARES money fundamentally is that they overfunded existing authorizations. And existing authorizations are what drives appropriations in the day to day. The LSTA framework was the only federal block grant that had, it was the federal agency, the appropriate federal agency in the federal block grant formula that was able to be overfunded in that crisis response environment. It meant that the other funding that was available from all these other different departments. And I want to come back to congressional earmarks in a second because it's very material right now. The other funding formulas that were out there that did not have special districts, in particular library districts, in the funding formula, there was nothing to overfund. There was no existing authorization. And if you're not in the authorization, you'll never be in the appropriation. So the goal here is not just noble about like let's rising tide all boats, a thousand flowers bloom. This is the fundamentals. If you're not legally eligible to apply as a special district library, then you ain't gonna never get it. It's like the advocacy work that we do about school libraries in between reauthorization cycles for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. We can yell all we want until they crack open the authorization. We're not going to get any different landscape for policy in DC. And that matters in places even like, and this is illustrative of, I think, how we are not in the authorization otherwise as special districts. Municipalities are in these different federal agencies. The municipalities are. We're working on a report right now for the last several years of congressional earmarks. We want to bring it all together, deeply talk about what programs were funded, what the initiatives were, how they're going in the case of the 2021 cycle, if we've got enough runway. But boil it all down to sugar. In 2023, there were 74 projects across 9 federal agencies that members of Congress funded special in the earmark framework, $90.9 million dollars. Only one special district was in there at all. And I don't know how they got in there. And I'm not going to name who they are. You can go look at the GAO report from 2023 if you're purely interested. But either a member of Congress, their staff, or somebody just didn't recognize it because there's no municipalities are funded. It's the public library of a town, a borough, a county, a parish. God bless them. I want to see $180 million next year for libraries. This is not a zero sum game. But how do we make sure that we're shovel ready? Is to participate actively in this process of ensuring that somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40% of public libraries can receive direct funding from programmatic opportunities like this. All right, so if we bring it all together, the next slide is going to say questions, comments, and concerns, by the way. So if you've got any, get prepared to come on mic, put it in the chat. Those of you who are watching at home later on, you can email me and Tim, and our emails will be at the end. Again, the federal definition for special district being inserted into Title 13 for the Census Bureau, the clarity that the Census Bureau needs, these accepted standards, but how do we leverage it in the future if this happens? When we are talking about sources of funding that have otherwise been uneligible to become authorized and eligible, we have a lot of work to do, I think, because we also do have some authorizations already amongst libraries, or for libraries amongst some other federal programs that are not necessarily oversubscribed right now. And we've already been authorized in the WIOA, the Workforce Innovation Act, in order to do Title II funding as part of that block grant. Libraries are in there. It's letter F on the reauthorizations. There's a framework around FEMA for certain kinds of programs. There is some eligibility for public libraries in partnership with school districts within the 21st century learning centers authorizations, but we're not touching most anything on ag, on HUD, on HHS, especially if we're looking at health. Now, DEA, the Digital Equity Act, is a whole other matter. But again, that's a block grant program that had us in there from the beginning. Thank you to NDEA. And then how are the states implementing it? If we're gonna spend the political capital to find this new opportunity, my greatest hope is that we write the right kind of grant applications after we succeed with an HR 7525. All right, team. What is on your mind? I can go back into slides more. Tim's been at the table a lot more than I have. Points of clarification, Tim, while people are thinking and digesting?
I think I will want to come back with some of the participants here on that question about the numbers, because I think that there were some conversations that got started that we definitely want to see through about, well, how could this, how could this number, what went behind this number? I think as you started raising questions about that, you being the folks we were reaching out to, that actually, led to some of this additional digging, and we will continue to try to understand that so that we can know the extent to which this impacts the different states.
Mm-hmm.
There were, as John mentioned, there were a few states where the numbers were just so incredibly low, like, 2 special districts or 3 special districts. They became kind of head scratchers.
Mm-hmm.
And as some of you on this call are aware, some of the higher numbers too were a little bit head scratching, but we're working to get to the bottom of that, and we'll continue those conversations with you.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So does the National Special Districts Coalition, do they have a list on their website of who the special districts are in each state?
I don't know if they have the full 35,000 district laundry list.
Mm-hmm.
They do have the state organizations. Um, there are certain states that have the State Association of Special Districts. Not every state does.
I don't think Kentucky does, but we do have special districts. I was just wondering what they say for Kentucky.
Hmm.
Because in Kentucky, we have most libraries are special purpose governmental entities.
Hmm. Right. So, Tim, we've got that dossier, and I think it's posted on the Every Library guidance page too.
Yeah. And Nicole, I can dig that. And Nicole, you were asking about library specifically,
Yeah.
yeah, I can let me dig that up and make sure that's in your inbox after we're done here.
Okay. Another question, you said that this is separate from the IMLS LSTA funding. Is it separate from the state library's determination of an eligible public library?
This affects Title 13, which is the Census Bureau.
Okay.
This is not touching on the Library Technical Services Act. No, what's the official name? I'm drawing a blank, Tim. What's the real name for the authorization for IMLS LSTA?
Mm,
You know what I'm talking about.
I do, but I'd have to look up the official name too.
Me too.
Don't
Darn it.
forget
Feeling
I
like an
was just
amateur hour over here. But no, this is Title 13.
because we have three public libraries that we consider eligible public libraries, but they're not special districts.
Hmm.
So,
And Kara at Montana gets a gold star for the Library Services Technology Act team in the chat.
Yes.
okay, thanks.
All right, folks. Again, this is not a lobbying activity today, but if you do feel compelled and interested, please, take an action professionally and personally, but really talk about it, please, amongst your stakeholders. This is not affecting each and every state. There are some states that have nothing to do with the special districts thing. They look at you like you were crazy. But they might have more nonprofit 501c3 and association libraries in their space. And when they have a bill floating around about the nonprofit tax deduction for charitable nonprofit issues around um, um, supports during times of crisis, those kinds of bills are the kinds of bills we also want to show up for and in solidarity with each other. So we are looking to motivate across the library industry, especially if HR 7525 gets stalled in the Senate. But if you are a stakeholder state where there are your members, your constituents, your libraries who could stand to benefit from this, this is a good opportunity for us to do some prep. Because if it does pass, there will be, as the next 3, 5, 7, 10, 20 years happen, for new opportunities for library funding. Anything else come to mind, team, or should we go to the wrap-up slide, Tim? Great.
Yeah.
So, Tim, what do you got going on here?
Yeah, we just wanted to mention this again. This is kind of a postscript. This is kind of away now from the main topic of the day. But one of the other things that we've learned in working with National Special Districts Coalition is that they have been over the last, I think, 2 years establishing within themselves groups that get together with some frequency of the different types of districts. So I believe there's a Parks and Recreation group. And as we started working with them, they said, we really wanted to start bringing together community of librarians in special districts. Can you help us with that? So over the last year, we did connect them with a number of librarians in special district libraries that were interested in getting together, really almost as a community of practice, but also to provide NSDC with information that would be helpful to them on their policy and advocacy efforts. So we actually see this as a good opportunity. At this stage, you do not have to be necessarily a member of National Special Districts Coalition to participate in these. And I think a lot of folks on the call today are from state agencies or associations. And although you would be welcome at this, I think that this is their idea is to really have maybe directors of or senior staff members of actual special district libraries getting together. They met, I think it was 4 or 5 times in the last year. They've recently had a change in their staffing with their community managers specifically. So they've put this library policy advocacy group on hold for the moment, but where they have every intention to resurrect that when they have the staffing in place. And we expect that will be sometime probably late summer or early fall. So we just wanted again to put this out for you to be aware of. And if you want to note it, we'll be tracking it, and you can ask us, what's going on with this if time passes, or when this does come to the point where we're reviving it, we'll be probably doing some publicity around that, maybe getting back in touch with you all since you will have heard about it at this point, to see if we can help them bring this special, this library voice to the table to them in a different way. So stay tuned on that front.
Yeah, I appreciate, Tim, that you're going to spend that kind of time with the coalition work and that open invitation, team. We're not gatekeeping here. You don't have to come through us, but we can make it easy for you to get involved. Email Tim, email me, give me a call. We want to make sure that this is part of a new approach to new funding. It's part and parcel of every library and every library institute's work is to make sure that we are focusing on the money so that your libraries, your folks, even for your state agencies, your staff can do their jobs well. So it's nice to be able to have this conversation with you today. Thanks very much, team. Have a good one.
Thank you.